In a quiet kingdom where reputation meant everything, there was a woman whose name traveled through the streets faster than the church bells at dawn. People did not shout it across markets or mention it freely at family tables. They lowered their voices when they spoke of her, as though the air itself might carry the sound back to her ears. Her name was Alara, and in the village of Hollingford, she was known as the woman everyone feared. Children were warned about her long before they understood why. When villagers saw her walking down the narrow road toward the market in the early morning mist, conversations stopped. Farmers leaned on their fences and watched in silence. Shopkeepers suddenly found something important to rearrange on their stalls. Even the dogs seemed to grow quiet, as if they too understood that when Alara appeared, it was wiser to stay out of her way. People had many explanations for their fear. Some said she had the sharpest tongue in the valley and could embarrass a grown man in front of a crowd without raising her voice. Others claimed she had once chased a traveling merchant out of town after accusing him of cheating a widow. Over the years, those stories grew larger, until Alara became something more than a difficult neighbor. She became a legend of stubbornness and confrontation. Very few people ever stopped to ask why she behaved the way she did. In small villages, reputations are built quickly and rarely change. Once the people of Hollingford decided who Alara was, they stopped looking any deeper. Yet far beyond the quiet hills surrounding that village stood the stone palace of Valenbrook, where another story was quietly unfolding. King Adrian had ruled the kingdom for many years with patience and steady judgment. Farmers trusted his laws, merchants respected his rule, and distant towns spoke of him as a king who listened before making decisions. But even strong rulers cannot escape personal loss. 2 winters earlier, his queen had passed away, leaving a silence in the palace that no ceremony could replace. Advisors grew increasingly concerned about the future of the throne. The Council of Lords insisted the king must remarry. A queen, they argued, would restore stability and secure the kingdom's future. Soon noble families began arriving at court with daughters dressed in silk and jewels. Each young woman spoke with perfect manners and careful politeness, hoping to impress the king. Yet King Adrian remained strangely unmoved. He listened respectfully, but his eyes often drifted toward the tall windows of the throne room, as if he were searching for something beyond the elegant performances before him. His advisors believed the kingdom needed a queen who was graceful, obedient, and agreeable. But the king was beginning to believe the kingdom needed something very different. Reports had begun arriving from distant villages describing dishonest traders exploiting farmers and local councils favoring wealthy families while ignoring the poor. None of these problems threatened the kingdom immediately, but King Adrian understood how small injustices could slowly weaken the trust that held a nation together. What he needed beside the throne was not another polite voice agreeing with tradition. He needed someone brave enough to speak the truth. Far away in Hollingford, Alara continued living exactly as she always had. She walked through the market with the same determined stride, argued with dishonest traders, and refused to stay silent simply because others felt uncomfortable. The villagers believed this behavior confirmed everything they already thought about her. To them, she was loud, confrontational, and impossible to reason with. But one autumn morning, the marketplace revealed a different side of the story. A traveling merchant had set up a stall beside the village well, selling peppers and onions stacked neatly in wooden baskets. At first, everything looked ordinary, but a few farmers began whispering that the merchant's scales seemed slightly heavier than they should have been. Most people noticed the problem, but said nothing. Confrontation created tension, and peace in Hollingford was often preserved by choosing silence. Alara did not share that approach. She stepped closer to the stall and picked up one of the iron weights, examining it carefully before placing it back on the table with a firm sound. Then she accused the merchant openly of cheating the villagers. A crowd gathered quickly as the argument grew louder. To most people watching, the scene looked exactly like what they expected from Alara, another public confrontation. But standing quietly beside the stall was an elderly woman clutching her purse, watching the exchange with anxious eyes. When the merchant realized he could no longer deny the accusation in front of so many witnesses, he lowered his prices and packed away the dishonest scale. The crowd dispersed, relieved. But by afternoon, the story spreading through the village did not mention the cheating merchant. Instead, people talked about Alara's temper. They repeated the parts where she raised her voice and embarrassed the traitor in public. Each retelling polished the same image of Alara until the truth beneath it slowly disappeared. Yet there were quieter details few people noticed. More than once Alara had left baskets of bread outside the homes of struggling families after dark. When traveling traders tried to pressure children into buying useless trinkets, she was often the one who sent them away. These moments happened quietly, without witnesses, and so the reputation remained stronger than the truth. The villagers thought they understood Alara, but they were wrong. Then one cold morning, a royal messenger rode into Hollingford. The town crier rang the bell in the village square, and farmers, merchants, and families gathered around the well as the messenger unrolled a parchment sealed with the royal emblem. King Adrian, he announced, would soon choose a new queen. Women from towns and villages across the kingdom were invited to travel to the palace and present themselves before the royal court. Excitement spread through Hollingford like a sudden storm. Young women dreamed about palace halls and royal gowns. Mothers discussed manners and dresses. Families debated which daughters might represent the village well. Everyone assumed the same thing. The king would choose someone gentle, graceful, and polite. There was only one woman nobody expected to see among the candidates: Alara. Weeks later, the palace courtyard of Valenbrook filled with women from every corner of the kingdom. Elegant dresses shimmered beneath the morning light as candidates introduced themselves before the king. Each spoke politely about loyalty, honor, and admiration for the crown. Yet as King Adrian listened, something felt rehearsed. Every answer sounded exactly like what the candidates believed the king wanted to hear. Then, near the end of the ceremony, a quiet disturbance appeared at the courtyard gate. A woman had arrived late. Her dress was simpler than the others. Her posture carried calm confidence. It was Alara. When her turn came to speak, the advisors expected the same compliments they had heard all morning. But Alara did something no one else dared to do. She told the truth. Instead of praising the kingdom's perfection, she spoke about the struggles she had witnessed in villages like Hollingford. She described farmers losing fair prices because of dishonest traders and councils ignoring the voices of poor families. The courtyard grew silent. Some nobles looked shocked. Others looked offended. No candidate had ever spoken so openly during a royal ceremony. Many believed she would be punished. But King Adrian said nothing. Instead, he quietly ended the ceremony and dismissed the crowd. That night, he gave secret instructions to a group of trusted guards. They were to travel to Hollingford and observe Alara's life carefully. What they discovered surprised even them. Yes, Alara argued loudly in the marketplace, but each argument had a reason. They saw her expose dishonest traders, defend farmers during disputes, and quietly leave food outside the home of a struggling widow. The more they observed, the clearer the pattern became. Alara did not create conflict for its own sake. She confronted injustice because she refused to ignore it. When the guards returned to the palace and reported everything to King Adrian, the king listened carefully. What the villagers saw as cruelty, he saw as courage. Weeks later, the great hall of Valenbrook filled with nobles and visitors waiting to hear the king's decision. Everyone expected the name of a graceful noblewoman. Instead, King Adrian spoke a name that sent shock through the entire chamber. Alara. Murmurs spread quickly through the hall. Some advisors looked stunned. Others whispered in disbelief. How could the woman known for confronting merchants become queen? The king raised his hand for silence. Then he spoke clearly. A kingdom does not need another pretty face. It needs someone brave enough to speak the truth. The room fell quiet. King Adrian explained that leadership required courage, honesty, and the willingness to challenge injustice. Those qualities, he believed, mattered far more than elegance or polite manners. And Alara possessed them all. The woman once feared by an entire village had become queen of Valenbrook. At first, many members of the royal court expected trouble. Instead, something remarkable happened. Alara brought the same determination she once carried through the marketplace into the palace itself. New rules were introduced to ensure fair trade in markets across the kingdom. Traders were required to use official scales stamped with the royal seal. Councils were reminded that the crown expected fairness for rich and poor alike. Some powerful merchants complained, but farmers began returning home from markets with fair prices for their harvests. Villagers who had once struggled quietly found new protections under the crown. Slowly, the kingdom began to change. And back in Hollingford, The villagers who once feared Alara began seeing her story differently. They remembered the arguments in the marketplace, but now they also remembered the farmers she defended and the widows she helped. The reputation that once frightened them began to look very different. What they had called anger was often courage. What they had called stubbornness had been a refusal to accept injustice. The woman they feared had become the protector they never knew they needed. Years later, people across the kingdom still told the story of how King Adrian chose the one woman nobody expected. Because sometimes the people we judge the most harshly are the ones strong enough to change the world. But now we want to hear from you. If you had lived in the village of Hollandford and watched Alara confront merchants in the marketplace, would you have trusted her the way King Adrian did? Or would you have feared her like everyone else? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories.